This is entitled, Where Was God on October 7th? It's part of our ongoing series of MIdrash, the psychological backstory to the Bible. My wife and I recently returned from a trip to the United States, and when we were taking our cab from the airport in Israel home to our home in Jerusalem, the cab driver complained about this very title, Where Was God on October 7th? So I'd like to make an attempt to answer that very difficult question by quoting from the oral tradition, the MIdrash, in a very unusual place in the Bible. As you may know, there's the Song of the Sea that Moses started to sing with the Jewish people, and that came after the splitting of the Red Sea and all the miracles. And he used one word there, which the Midrash picks up on. This is often the case, that one word changes the entire meaning of the text that you would never see if you just looked at a translation. And here the word is, in Hebrew, it's uz, which means in the future. So that song started, in the future we will sing. What's interesting is that the Midrash says that the reason he chose that word is because of an incident earlier on in which he used that very same word. So what was that? When Moses finally accepted God's mandate to come and help save the Jewish people, redeem them from Egypt, he came before Pharaoh with his brother Aaron, and he demanded that he let my people go. And of course, Pharaoh was not receptive to this, and not only that, Pharaoh actually, while the conversation was ensuing, according to the Midrash, he actually ordered something that caused tremendous pain and anguish to the Jewish people. In other words, they had a quota every day of making bricks because they were slaves in Egypt, and he said, you know what? Now you have to go gather the raw materials, the straw, to build those bricks, and you have to keep the same quota. And it was very devastating to the Jewish people. And when Moses emerged from the meeting and he heard the news, he complained to God. And he basically said, I'll read it to you. This is Exodus chapter 5, verse 23. He said, ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, you have worsened the plight of the nation and you do not save your nation. Okay, that's a translation, but again, very critically, it starts out with the word oz, that same very word in Hebrew. If you were looking in the Hebrew verse, you'd see the same word, as I mentioned later on, he used after the Song of the Sea. So what's going on here? So the Midrash picks up on the fact that this word was actually showing that he had remorse for the accusation he made against God. What did he realize? He realized later on that this was all part of God's plan, that he judged God at that very moment when their decree worsened. But he didn't realize that God had a plan, and it unfolded itself over many years, and you can now, when you look back, you see that it was all for a purpose. In fact, this what I'm telling you now actually is something I got from a lecture online. I'll below give you the link from a great Jewish rabbi and thinker and scholar, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik. So he was making the point that the Jewish people had sort of gotten used to slavery, and it's not like they were okay with it, but they gave up hope. They said, okay, this is a grinding life, but we can do it, we could survive this tragedy of having to make the bricks, and with the same quota, pushed them over the edge, and now they became more aware that they desperately need some kind of redemption. They were open to the whole redemption process that God was about to start. And so it was perfect timing, and Moses realized later that that was God's purpose. And so he judged God unfairly. Of course, God is above time and space, so to pin God down on what he does in any given moment doesn't give you the vantage point of seeing how something plays out over time. Rabbi Soloveitchik compared this to to something that happened early on in the history of the Jews in Israel. In fact, before it was a state, in Palestine, 1946, Palestine was ruled by the British, and 1946 was, after the Holocaust, and there was no state, and there was a plan put forth by both the British and the United States to bring 100,000 Jews who survived the Holocaust, they were in perhaps DP camps, bring them to Palestine. This plan was opposed by Ernest Bevin, the British Foreign Secretary, and he did not allow it to go through. And this was devastating news to what was called as the Yishuv, which was the provisional government of Israel. There was no official government yet, but the Jews were already organized, and the provisional government took this news as terribly tragic because their hopes had been dashed that somehow this would all lead to a Jewish state, and the British were looking favorably upon that. It was just a process that was playing out. But as soon as they realized that they wouldn't even let 100,000 Jews who were, malnourished and very, barely survived with their life, and they were in DP camps, wouldn't even let these people come to Palestine, they realized something has to be done. A new tactic, a new strategy has to be taken, and they became more heroic in their efforts to get the British out. And so, two things that you can see in hindsight. Number one, had 100,000 Jews come in, it's possible that the world would have said, okay, you don't really need a Jewish state because, look, you got all these people here, it's all fine, it's working fine with the British. And number two, as I said, they needed to find a more heroic means of getting the British out, and that changed their attitude, and then this really led to eventually the proclamation of the State of Israel. Of course, what Rabbi Soloveitchik was doing was really pulling back the curtain, showing how God's hand in history, that's again something that was very painful at the time, was necessary in order to get the results that later happened. So coming back to the tragedy of October 7th, would our cab driver be satisfied with the approach? Would he agree that there could be, in retrospect, something good that we will see coming from these terrible events? One could argue that Jews around the world are coming closer to their Jewish identity, but then again, these events are too close and too raw for us to have full perspective. But I do believe that in the long run, it will be seen as an essential part of Jewish destiny.